Gretchen. This is day 5.5 of the Servant Program. Today we're going to be talking about first versus last results. We obtain paradoxical results when we engage in first and last desire obtainment processes. That is, what seemed to be true at first contradicts with what we actually obtain in the end. When we continuously engage in first northeast processes to receive first northeast effects, we may feel all the peace we desire in the beginning. But over an extended period of time, our effect sensors are numbed incrementally. When we continuously receive too much peace, for how little we sacrifice, those effect sensors, their sensitivity is not sustainable. We started out desiring to feel an intense amount of peace, but paradoxically, we finish with the inability to feel it. If we increase the intensity of the northeast effects that we're experiencing as a resolution process, we will only increase the numbness in our effect sensors. In your present desire attainment process, are your effect sensors increasing in numbness? When we consume physical first northeast effects continuously, the first thing to go is our ability to sense our general last causes spiritual effects. These are the foundational guidance effects in our desire attainment process. Without them, we don't know whether we're on or off track to obtaining our desire. So do you overconsume physical first northeast effects? And how well are you able to sense your general last causes spiritual effects? Eventually, our physical effect sensors become numbed to the very substances we're relying on for peace. The intensity of the first physical effects, such as food, drugs, alcohol, remains the same. It is the state of our effect sensors that changes from being sensitive to becoming numb. So have you needed to up the dose of your physical northeast effects over time in order to maintain the same degree of peace? The intensity of spiritual effects from specific causes can change. We sense that difference by degrees. They may have started out intense, but over time have become more dull. It is difficult to tell whether it's our effect sensors becoming more numb, or if it's their effects becoming more dull, if we ourselves are consuming on a regular basis first northeast effects. So if the intensity of the effects in any of your relationships is decreasing over time, have you experimented with decreasing the amount of northeast effects that you consume in order to evaluate the results? In the paradoxical result, substances and causes are more accurately identified. If we pay attention to the incremental changes in the effects we experience, especially the general effects we experience, we won't end up in an inescapable trap before we realize this isn't the pathway that leads to our desired destination. In your desire obtainment process, do you regularly take the time to assess the changes in your general effects. First northeast effects block our ability to recognize that our process is in the northeast. They reward us as if we were sacrificing in the northwest. When our sacrifice process is continuously in the northeast, our ability to sacrifice atrophies, and we gradually lose knowledge that we once had. We become increasingly unaware. Over time, even sacrifices that were once easy for us to accomplish start feeling like they're past our northwest threshold. The intensity of the sacrifices themselves stays the same. It is our capacity to sacrifice that decreases. What we feel versus what we're actually doing is not accurate. Therein lies the loss of our awareness. We know that over time we lose our ability to physically sacrifice at the same intensity levels we did in our youth. Yet our choice to engage in first desire attainment processes accelerates that loss. Our ability to spiritually sacrifice paradoxically increases as our physical ability naturally decreases. That is because the incremental progression to death that requires us to physically sacrifice at greater levels over time is inherently a spiritual strengthening process if we allow it to be. There's no avoiding that downward progression, but we can use it to our advantage. Are you losing your physical ability to sacrifice at a more accelerated pace as a result of your continuous first northeast desire obtainment process? Are you striving to engage in physical last desire obtainment processes within your threshold, wherever that is right now? Are you losing the ability to spiritually sacrifice at the same intensity level you did in the past? When we continuously sacrifice beyond our own personal northwest threshold, even though that sacrifice is a northeast process, the end result is physical injury and spiritual anger. Spiritual anger is spiritual injury or spiritual inflammation. This is where we experience both sides of the imbalance. Fear, because we can't feel the peace we desire, and depression, because we can't even accomplish the normal daily sacrifices we need to engage in to take care of ourselves. This is the trap we end up in when we rely on first northeast effects. Are you ending up with injuries because of your physical atrophy? Is your anger virulent? Remember, that word virulent means extremely severe or harmful in its effects, highly infective, bitterly hostile. It means a sustainable result that we don't want, that makes us miserable. Are the daily sacrifices you need to engage in resulting in virulent anger? It's important to note that sometimes when we desire to increase the intensity level of peace that we experience, we may think the process to obtain that is a receiving process. But paradoxically, we can't increase that level in its sustainability unless we engage in last northwest threshold sacrifice processes. It's an opportunity cost. We give up the here and now intense effects for the sustainable intense ones in the result. Do you desire to experience a greater intensity of peace? We also need to remember that we can't engage in just any old sacrifice process. It needs to be the one inherent to our core desire. Sometimes we're barking up the wrong tree, having chosen a desire and process that don't really hit the spot. We're spending all our time and energy on that, yet the general effects of joy we experience are getting duller over time. That's when we need to do a little more research and a little more experimentation to find the specific desire and process that are more balanced with the general. And we feel it in the result when that is the case. When those effects increase in intensity towards our desired inherent balance, over time, we know we're on the right track. Is your present specific desire balanced enough with your general desire? Which last northwest thresholds sacrifice processes do you need to engage in to obtain your desired level of intensity and its sustainability? Consuming first northeast effects is very common. We most likely have done this since we were young and before we understood why we should avoid them. So we don't need to be judgmental of ourselves, critical of ourselves or others because they do this. It's a matter of understanding ourselves, understanding what we need and how best to obtain that. And also understanding the results, the paradoxical results when we do seek to obtain what we want from northeast first effects. For me, I have definitely engaged in first northeast processes to obtain first northeast effects, thinking that that's where my joy was, that's where my excitement in life was. For me, it's in treats and chocolate and cake, ice cream, cookies, all those kinds of things. I was raised to look to those as a form of excitement, as something to look forward to. And you eat all your dinner and you get your dessert. And while that's okay, I'm sure okay to a certain extent, it basically trained my mind that that was what I wanted. That was my end result. I have had to really work hard to overcome, that tendency to turn to first northeast effects because it just slows me down. And it's hard because you walk into the store and they have everything that you're trying to avoid out on the end caps. They want it all, out there to tempt you and to, because they know what it does. It makes your saliva glands, start to work and especially if you are trying to avoid those things, you're feeling it inside. You're remembering, oh, I remember what it was like to eat that kind of stuff, and it makes you want it again, almost in a reactionary response that is outside of our control, like Pavlov's dogs, right? You hear the bell and you start salivating. You see the packages, you see and think of the memories. They are associated with the memories so closely of good times that you start salivating. You start thinking, oh, I probably would be so happy if I could have those. Of course, knowledge helps us, beat that. It helps us say, I know that's not the case. So it is a strengthening process. It's incremental. It takes time. I know that other first northeast effects behave in the same way. Treats are less severe. There are less severe addiction or bondage. There's this show called Heavy that that these people weigh over 400 pounds because of their addiction to food and eating the first northeast, substances, and they're addicted to them, and they cannot pull away from them, and it has robbed them for any desire to eat nutritious foods, and they're in total atrophy, and they're at risk, to die, and they're totally accelerating their process towards death. And so it does, for some people, become very life-threatening. For me, I wouldn't say life-threatening, but I would say emotionally, spiritually, it definitely was threatening, because the more I consumed those things, the number my effect sensors became. And I'm the type of person who needs to be able to sense intensely my general last causes effects. And if I do not, and if I cannot, I'm not okay. So I hope that those of you who have other addictions, like to drugs or alcohol or pornography or whatever it is, and apply my story to yours. We'll continue day 5.5 in the next video cast.